Good morning. This is my first opportunity to address the Board of Directors as your Vice President, Administration Secretary, as I was elected to this post at this time last year to fill a vacancy. While I previously served as ALPA's National Resource Coordinator, Executive Vice President for the Spirit Pilots, this latest post has been a real eye-opener for me. I assumed the duties of this office during a particularly dynamic period for the association, and it's reasonable to say that I've learned a lot about who we are as an organization and what we need to accomplish. I particularly appreciate the warm reception Jason, Wendy, Wes have given me and the spirit of camaraderie that has developed among the four of us. It seems fitting that for the 50th regular meeting of ALPA's highest governing body, we find ourselves down the hall from the very ballroom where the Chicago Convention established ICAO was signed nearly 80 years ago. Now as then, ALPA continues to work with airline pilots from around the globe to promote safety and influence important standards and recommended practices. While Jason and Wendy have given you briefings this morning on our current national and international priorities, I'm going to focus much of my report on what we are doing to improve the internal policies as they relate to our organizational and effectiveness and efficiency. We have much to talk about, but before I cover this, let's take a moment to look at the status of our union. As of this month, ALPA represents 78,480 pilots at 41 airlines in the United States and Canada. As compared to the member totals we've announced at the 49th previous regular meeting of this governing body, that's the largest number of pilots we've ever represented, and it's a landmark accomplishment we should celebrate. When the BOD last met, ALPA represented a mere 66,228 pilots at 40 airlines. The member increase in the last 2 years is even more amazing when you consider that more than 3,000 of our members have retired since October 2022, when we last got together. Some of the growth we've witnessed can be attributed to the enormous expansion in North American aviation industry since COVID-19 pandemic. Just as important are the new groups that have joined our union in the last 2 years. These include Air Canada, Air Inuit, Kuwaitan, and Pascan Aviation. With the inclusion of these groups, the association announced that it represents 95% of the airline pilots in Canada. The pilots of Lynx Air, Aero, also joined ALPA in the last 2 years, but unfortunately, their carriers have ceased operations since then. Meanwhile, Bearskin became a division of Perimeter Aviation. In addition, carriers like Spirit, Mesa have recently announced furloughs. Despite these challenges, the pilots of United, Delta have worked with their respective airlines to offer workshops and other resources to provide these displaced members with some assistance. The current administration has placed a special emphasis on the increased communication and collaboration among the union's MECs, and this is precisely the kind of support pilot groups should extend to their peers in need. I applaud the Delta and United pilots for their display of consideration and support. To be able to provide this kind of assistance requires a foundation of not only adequate resources, but necessary staffing, having sufficient member participation to perform the responsibilities of your pilot group while also contributing to the larger organization. As I previously noted, we have the largest membership in our association's history. However, to continue the success we've achieved, we will also need to maintain comparable, if not greater levels of member volunteerism. A huge member count only works in our favor if those pilots are actively involved in their union. As you hear at countless ALPA functions, the demographics and dynamics of ALPA are changing dramatically. Baby boomers, Gen Xers are retiring or approaching their retirement in large numbers. More and more younger pilots are joining our ranks. This impacts the messaging we use with newer generations to promote greater awareness of the union and foster participation. The bottom line is that change is inevitable and ALPA must change if it is to survive. Phil Comstock of Lescalt and Walderman, Inc. has conducted polling for ALPA and other trade unions for decades, and his understanding of pilot labor and engagement is truly remarkable. Comstock has repeatedly acknowledged that union membership among airline pilots is noticeably higher than that of any other job category in the private sector. He has observed that airline pilots have intrinsic common ground with their peers, one of the main reasons for the high percentage of unionization in the profession. However, the dynamic of the post-COVID airline environment have created a challenge for ALPA pilots, pilot groups, in the form of rapid pilot movement between carriers. As a general rule, pilots at smaller airlines have been upgrading to captains and quickly transitioning to carriers with larger aircraft. Large airlines have been forced to contend with huge influxes of new pilots. Both groups have been overwhelmed at times, making the effort to onboard new members in both environments has become difficult, particularly with the loss of experience and institutional knowledge as volunteers retire or move on, and other changes occur. Comstack has indicated that on a continuing basis, roughly 6 to 7% of our pilot membership is highly engaged. With 78,000 pilots, that correlates to 4,700 to 5,500 pilot volunteers. These are the people who run for office or actively support our committee structures. However, these numbers are beginning to drop off in part because many younger members see their immediate circumstances at smaller carriers as temporary. I'm beginning to hear reps say things like, "What happens if no one runs for my office after I leave?" If we don't get our junior members engaged in the union within the first couple years of their airline pilot experience, the likelihood of their active participation later in their career begins to dwindle. This reality is something we cannot afford to ignore. Many of the committees I work with are exploring meaningful ways we can get these younger pilots on board. As one example, the recent reestablishment of the Professional Development Group chair position coordinates the support we are providing to current and future members. You'll hear more about those services later in this meeting. Mentoring plays an important part in facilitating member participation. ALPA conducted its first mentorship seminar in June at the United MEC offices here in Chicago. We talked about the challenges I've raised this morning and how some of our MECs have implemented mentoring programs to onboard new hires as well as committee volunteers. Other efforts include the use of Real Magnet drip campaigns. These programs feature automated emails distributed over a 12 to 18-month period, which educate new members about the union based on your MEC's onboarding schedule. This messaging allows you to set up communication during different stages of a pilot's probationary period and highlights common resources as well as actions you want a new hire to take to become a good ALPA citizen. In addition, several pilot groups are working with Cooper, a software platform that keeps track of new hires and their experiences with the association at previous carriers. We're also in the process of developing a new turnkey mentoring program to help other pilot groups get their mentoring efforts started. As a union, we routinely talk about the advantages of learning from peer experiences and not having to reinvent the wheel when facing new challenges. Mentoring is fundamental to ensuring all ALPA members are aware of the resources at their disposal and are properly educated so they can make informed decisions. Engaging our new members is only part of the equation. While ALPA has continued to grow and our pilot groups take advantage of pattern bargaining to secure positive contract gains, we can't lose sight of potentially dated practices that require our attention. Many of our policies we have in place were enacted decades ago, reflecting former technologies in a different time. This administration has also stressed the need to better support our pilot groups by making sure that they have access to resources they need and augmenting our national committee structure as a means of providing additional guidance and support. In addition, ALPA has been conducting a national member tracking poll in recent months to gauge our pilots' priorities and give them an opportunity to provide their union with important feedback. ALPA General Manager David Krieger will have more to say about this effort later in this meeting. ALPA is revising its policies to ensure that they reflect the way we do business today. For example, recognizing that we represent a population constantly on the move, we continue to consider ways to fine-tune virtual local council meetings to increase participation. Special considerations are being given to provide adequate member protections in the instance that management representatives covertly participate. With the reliability of electronic communication and the reality that virtually everyone has email, the Executive Board recently acted on a resolution to amend Section 25 to address mailing timelines. We're still required by law to mail notifications, but timelines are no longer based on these mailing dates. We're also reviewing representational structures as outlined in ALPA's Constitution and Bylaws, Article 3, to make sure our pilots get the services and support they require. Specifically, Delta Council 66 in New York provides a good illustration. This is a relatively junior base for Delta with nearly 30% of its 3,000 pilots on probation. Because of these numbers and ALPA's policy limitations placed on leadership staffing, one captain rep, one first officer rep are expected to meet the demands of this exceedingly large council. The formula for establishing super councils was established at a time when ALPA leaders did not anticipate local pilot groups of this size. By amending this policy and allowing greater flexibility in determining when structural changes are needed, the council could employ 4 status representatives instead of the current 2 to better meet the needs of the affected local councils. The BOD will be considering this proposal later in this meeting. Maintaining member participation, particularly for those who are volunteers, also remains an important priority for the union. To this end, the BOD has already passed an amendment to the Constitution and Bylaws, which allows members with reactivated status to utilize their previous experience in participating on ALPA committees. Later this week, you will act on a resolution to extend active membership from 90 days to 180 days for members taking a personal or military leave of absence, keeping them engaged with their union for a longer period of time. In addition, we need to explore new ways to promote and celebrate volunteerism in our ranks. And I'm happy to announce a new initiative to help address this need that all ALPA MECs are looking to expand their committee ranks. ASCBE is intended to recognize the outstanding efforts of those volunteers who currently serve and encourage other pilots to get involved. We will need your buy-in as well as your assistance in helping us identify those we should recognize. Of course, there will be some swag as part of this expression of appreciation. Plus, we plan to launch an accompanying web landing page, social media campaign, and other member communication vehicles to build interest and awareness. Look for a letter from your national officers shortly after the BOD meeting, outlining the plans for this program and using Jason's words, how we plan to move forward together to make it a success. As part of ALPA's efforts to focus more on the needs of individual pilot groups, improve our member onboarding efforts, and modernize the ways we do business, we need to keep up with new technology that can help us. Earlier this year, the Executive Council passed a resolution announcing that the use of artificial intelligence is prohibited from recording, transcribing, or summarizing any ALPA meeting. While this decision was a precautionary measure, please understand that your leadership is not against the use of AI. We already considering this application for chatbots and other functions. However, the requests coming from our pilot groups are becoming progressively more complex, and we're working on ways to stay ahead of the curve. Nonetheless, we must proceed with caution. As with any new program we introduce, we need to ensure that protections are in place so that we resolve old problems, we don't create new ones. Finally, this fall's Hurricane Helene and Milton helped remind us that widespread disasters can affect anyone regardless of where they live. Until recently, the idea of Gulf of Mexico hurricanes so dramatically impacting those living in the mountains 500 miles away was unthinkable. In addition to the loss of lives, the damage of the 2 storms has been estimated in the hundreds of billions of dollars. The ALPA Emergency Relief Fund, or Pilots for Pilots, has received nearly 115 requests for grants from members whose homes and properties were destroyed. To their credit, the P4P board recently streamlined the process for assessing grant requests. Like the various ALPA policies we're revisiting, they realized that with change in the ways we do business, ALPA could expedite the assistance we extend to pilot families in need. Please encourage your members affected by widespread disasters to use P4P and to also keep this important member resource solvent by making donations. In conclusion, ALPA continues to look for ways to advance our union with policies, practices that reflect evolving member needs and lifestyles. Our future depends upon it. Some of this effort will be addressed in our work this week. With the largest membership ALPA has ever witnessed, we are in the perfect position to use this enormous growth and resources that includes the members themselves. We are a pilot-driven organization, and we need to communicate to our pilots that the association is like a state-of-the-art computer with a full complement of features and capabilities. The computer can solve all kinds of problems and make our lives easier, but we have to put it to use to fully take advantage of what it is capable of. The point is, much like the computer, what we get from our union directly depends upon what we put into it. Many of you first learned about ALPA because you were faced with a problem. As ALPA leadership, you're now responding to those like you who may need the association's assistance for the first time. As you work with these pilots, particularly the new ones, think about the opportunity you have to encourage them to pay it forward, to take what they've learned from their experience and help others. Imagine what we could accomplish if half of our membership joined a committee, to use Phil Comstock's words, become highly engaged. It has been said, if you can visualize it, you can make it happen. As a reminder, look to the BOD 2024 ALPA.org website to stay on top of what's happening here this week. Please remember to support the Pilots for Pilots. Keep an eye out for details about the new Ask Me program, and thank you for your attention.